This is Navigating the Mahzor, which is the prayer book for the season of the High Holy Days. The idea is that this unit of the class is intended to help us understand the morning service, getting us through the Shema. The focus is going to be on the morning liturgy, the introduction to morning prayer, the texts, and some of the vocabulary that's going to get us through it. Now, for Bonnie and a couple of others who have participated in the Siddur class, a little bit of that vocabulary is going to be a little bit of a repeat, and that's okay and good, but it's actually intentional as well. Part of my intention is actually to give you a sense of the parallels between the Siddur and the Mahzor. So for us to delve into some of the similarities is intentional. I encourage you to follow along in the Mahzor. I encourage you to use any Mahzor you like, but as I said, I'm going to use the Lev Shalem. And as I pointed out to the students who participated in the Siddur class I did last, part of the beauty of the Jewish tradition is that we have these genizas, these attic-like spaces in the Jewish tradition where people buried, so to speak, their texts with God's name on them, and the marginalia, the marginal notes that people put in them, that is their marginal scribbles from out of history, is some of what we learned from best. So I want Karen's marginalia and Denise's scribbles and Suzanne's scribbles, right? I want your scribbles. Your scribbles are holy, and don't let anybody tell you it's wrong to write in a prayer book. There's no reason it's wrong to write in a prayer book. It's actually great for you. If you want to write in pencil, fine. But it's actually helpful to go right into it. So I encourage you to write in your Mahzor. Go for it. Go ahead and write in your Mahzor if that's something that's exciting to you. So grab that Mahzor if you want, but again, I'll be putting it up on the screen when we get there. I will give you, in giving you access to this slide, that little link to getting to that licensed version of Mahzor Lev Shalem. We will also likely be purchasing licenses for much of our congregation for those who are interested in accessing it digitally this year. So starting the day, some people have a lot of questions about where we get the rules of prayer anyway, and some people really like dates. If your eyes kind of glaze over when you think about dates, you don't have to think about these dates so much, but I do want you to think about where the rules of prayer come from. They start way back in temple times when prayer meant sacrificing animals and responding to the commands in the Torah that we should make offerings to God, and they continue on through rabbinic times, which get codified as oral law around the year 200 of the Common Era, just about. The Tosefta is either a parallel earlier or later text, depending on which scholar you listen to. And then there's the Talmud, which gets codified as oral law around the year 600. And that's the conversation in response to the Mishnah and the Tosefta and similar texts of that era, in which the rabbis sort of have a back and forth about when should you pray. Actually, the very first conversation, if you follow the Talmud in order, and the Mishnah as well, is from Brachot, is the conversation, when can Shema first be said? So from the first get-go, we were talking about how and when to pray. And then there are the codes. And the codes are for people like me who look at stories and think that stories are wonderful, but also, okay, but how do I live by them? I need codes. I need kind of like a rule book to live by. It's much simpler to kind of just look at a list of rules. Some of the ones you might have heard of are the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Torah, the medieval era, and beyond are famous for some of the most enduring code books that take the conversation from the Talmud and kind of take the winners from those discussions. They don't invent rules of their own. They take from the rabbinic tradition and codify them. Get it? Codes, codifying, that's the whole point. And then rabbinic responsa are exactly what they sound like. They're responses to questions. People have been sending rabbis questions about when and how to pray for a very long time. Those started a long time ago, and guess what? They continue even until today. If you weren't here before for this instruction, just know that if you want me to pause on anything or have a question, by the way, this is only one very small chunk of the course today where I'm going through a few introductory slides. But while I'm going through these slides, it's just hard for me to see questions in the chat. So if you have ideas, questions, you want me to pause for a moment, just let me know by unmuting yourself, and then I can do my best. I want us to think about a couple of things. Again, some of these are overlapping with the Siddur class that we had just a while ago, which is this idea of, am I supposed to start my day with prayer? Does it really just start in the synagogue when I walk in the door? And we're actually going to start today from Birkot HaShachar on the days of awe in the morning. And that Birkot HaShachar, those blessings in the morning, were intended to be done through the morning rituals at home. So what's different about these rituals that are done before leaving the home? They're tied into those rituals. They're tied into ritual moments and the doing of other things. Prayer in the synagogue is just that. It's tied to being in a synagogue community and just doing prayer. It's sort of divorced from those other ritual interactions. Oh, welcome to the Hovenstens. Good to have you here. Okay, we're easing our way into the prayer, and there's the Mishnah. Remember I said some of those words might come up later and some of those codes. So if your eyes glazed over before looking at them, now here you can actually look at a piece of the text of it. I don't want us to delve too deeply into what the Mishnah is itself. I just wanted to look at this little piece of this Mishnah that I love so much. Remember I mentioned Mishnah Brachot, that first one that people are so concerned in talking about how and when and what to pray? Well, in the 5th chapter, in the first Mishnah, there's this whole conversation about rabbis love to use double negatives. Ein ella, you shouldn't you can't do anything but. The only way to pray, omdim hipalel mitoch koved rosh, with a weighty head. What does that mean? A reverent state of mind. So this tells the story, the pious Hasidim, though, they used to wait an hour before praying. What does that mean? What could that mean for us, this Koved Rosh situation? What it means for us is where we begin as a congregation, right? What it means is both literally the prayers that we begin with are warm-up prayers, and also it's the state of mind that we're trying to get into. We're trying not to just leap into prayer. We're trying to get into it with a Koved Rosh. We're trying, the rabbinic text did not shy away from, if you remember from a couple of parashot ago, the rabbinic texts don't shy away from prescribing emotions. Ve'ahavta, you should love, right? You should be obedient and love. So you should pray with a Koved Rosh. Should be very attentive. And we have to get there somehow. And the somehow, according to that story in the Mishnah, to go back to it for a second, is you kind of hang around a while before you really get into praying. And we're really going to get into praying on the High Holy Days, so we really need some warm-up. And that's true any morning when we come in to pray. Okay, so where and when do we begin as a congregation on the High Holy Days? Well, this year, there are going to be some limited 2-hour slots on the field. And then there are going to be a whole host of different digital experiences. There's going to be full liturgy on both days of Rosh Hashanah. And those will begin with exactly what I'm talking about and what we'll first look at as text today. Birkot HaShachar, these first morning blessings. So actually start there. Some of these other services, the musical and intentional services that we're going to have, again, digitally anchored and based, the alternative options, the family options, whether that's the Hamalot one you're tuning into, or a Shir, they may or may not start there with Birkot HaShachar or with Pesukei de Zimra exactly. But they are going to start mitoch Koved Rosh. They've got to start from warming into it, right? The fixed liturgy in our tradition gives us something to do that with. So that's what the fixed liturgy is for. And in the full liturgy experiences, we will actually start with that. And in navigating the Mahzor in this class, we're of course going to start there because I want you to be able to navigate it this year and any year if we start from that place, or even if you were to do it at home. So what exactly is happening in that first hour or so of prayer? In a little bit, we're going to take a look at the whole prayer body up until the Torah service. And I've changed the name of this. I used to call it the skeleton, but that got very morbid. So I changed it to the Playbill because I'm going to tell you more about why I call it the Playbill when we actually go to look at it live. And there's a link in these slides to it. And we're going to take some notes live together on it as we discover our way through it together. Before we get to that actual playbill, I want us to talk through some vocabulary together to make sure that we are all on the same page. Again, we talked through some of this in our Siddur class, but I've made a couple of revisions. So I want us to make sure that we're all aware. Not everybody walks in with the same language, and not just because you might have a certain level, so to speak, of knowledge, but also because there's some Yiddish thrown in there, or there's some assumptions thrown in there that might assume different things of you than are true in terms of your background. So let's walk through these. When I say shul, I'm just slipping into a little bit of Yiddish, saying walking into synagogue. Tefillah, rabbinically in texts, ha-tefillah was just referring to the Amidah. And when we get there, I'm going to talk to you about how once upon a time that really was the core of the service, and everything in every true service throughout the year is built around an Amidah. But today, when people say tefillah, like doing tefillah, they use it the way they throw around Torah, right? Like, I have a great piece of Torah to share with you. They don't mean they're ripping off a piece of Torah scroll. They mean they have something to share with you out of the textual tradition or the oral tradition. Tefillah is the same way. I had a really great tefillah experience at camp. Maybe they were on a hike. I don't know, right? It could be anything. It's used more loosely, but it generally means prayer. Pesuki de Zimra, that's Aramaic. It just means Pesukim shel Zimra, verses of song, okay? Selections from Psalms and other biblical texts. Shachrit, this one is for the clarity of how I'm using it. Shachrit means dawn. It could mean the morning service more inclusively. Could mean just morning services generally. When I say Shachrit, I'm referring to the part of the service that begins with a Baruch Hu and gets you through the Amidah. We're going to look at that together. That happens every day, including Shabbat. Welcome, Judy, also. Davening. That's another Yiddish word. I just mean praying. Chiyuv.
Rabbi, can I ask you
obligation. Okay? So that is a word that we're going to get to in another slide in a minute. And chiyuv just has to do with this idea that some people engage with prayer from a place of, I'm going to make sure that I do and say the words that I'm supposed to do and say. Some people's relationship with Judaism and relationship with prayer is, I need to do and say these words. And these are the words on the page. I need to say them. That's also true of, I need to give tzedakah, and tzedakah is a chiyuv. It's an obligation, right? I'm supposed to do this because I'm obligated to do it. Okay. Shaliach tzibor, or shlichat tzibor, the one who is sent for the community, also abbreviated as the shots, not to be confused with Rabbi Shots, although a great mnemonic for Rabbi Shots' name and pronunciation. That is the designated prayer leader. Nusach hatefillah, nusach can mean two different things. Nusach can mean the version of the text of the liturgy that we're looking at. That's never what I mean, unless I specify that. I mean the music, which is the combination of mode and motif that we're using at the same time. Talit is a prayer shawl, Siddur is a prayer book. Mahzor, as we discussed on the first page, is the prayer book that we use on the High Holy Days. And I want to tell you something in the vein of several things I'm going to tell you, which are in the category of, I don't know if you'll believe me, but I promise you this is true. The only reason the Mahzor exists is because the extent of the differences between the material in the tefillot, in the prayers on the High Holy Days, and Shabbat or any weekdays is so vast that in order to actually include all those prayers, what you would have to append, what you'd have to add to any other Siddur would create an encyclopedia-wide book, if not worse, right? Like in theory, you could actually manipulate and add to and say, well, you could start with these and then flip here on Rosh Hashanah. But boy, oh boy, would we wind up with the craziest book, right, to include that. Does that make sense to you? Do you believe me? Maybe you believe me, maybe you don't believe me, but it's true. Otherwise, we would just have one Siddur, and at some point you would get to the section on Rosh Hashanah. But at some point someone said, Dainu, enough. Like, we're not going to do that. We're going to have our own book for the High Holy Days. Okay? A couple more slides, few more slides. The mumbling thing. I want to address this as we go through because we're going to get to a few points where we're talking about the getting through the different pages of the Mahzor. Same thing is true on Shabbat, where we begin a page and then we sort of disappear from vocalized led davening, right? I'm using the Yiddish word on purpose, led tefillah, and then come back and at the end of the page. This is a very Ashkenazi practice, and it's done for a few different reasons. It's done so that there's a little bit of a back and forth between the private and the shared public experience. We're all together at the beginning. Go into your private space and pray. We're back together. It's also done to give time to say every word on the page for those who are, going back to that word, fulfilling their chiyuv. They want to say every word on the page. They feel obligated to do so. What happens if the person leading is too fast for you? Well, there's a whole thing about that. And the idea is that we're going to get to a slide in a minute. Skip let me go back to it. What happens if the person leading is too fast for me? I reorganized these slides, so I'm just going to answer this orally. What happens if the person leading is too fast for me? You can slow down and go at your own pace, and knowing how to navigate the Mahzor allows for you to take your own time and go through it at your own pace. If you do want to keep up with the person who's leading, specifically, right, if it means something to you to be on the same page as them, to keep up with the little islands that they are doing out loud, then you can pray almost every word of the Mahzor in a valid way in English privately. We'll get to a slide later that highlights that. I'm going to skip this. We're going to get, I'm going to skip this as well, but I do want to point out that we're going to get to a moment. I want to tune you to this idea. What about the first moment that we need to have a minyan? I want to attune you to these questions about what's different about this Kaddish and why do we have to say it? What do we do if we don't have a minyan? I want us to be attuned to these questions when we get to the Playbill, when we get to the outline of the service. So start thinking about that. When are we first going to need a minyan as well? Because up until now, we've been talking about a lot of individual stuff with prayer. This is the slide about praying in English. It's a beautiful, beautiful text about praying in English, in which the rabbis are clearly wrestling with whether it's possible to pray in English or not. But it really is possible to pray in any language one desires, except that it was clear that at their time they were really resisting the idea of praying in Aramaic, and that was for a lot of reasons we're not going to get into at this moment. But English is definitely permitted for almost every single piece of our liturgy, and for the exceptions, we can talk about that a little bit later on in the course. We're going to get back to Mourner's Kaddish as well, but I want to attune you to that question also. And we're going to do a deep dive into Baruch She'amar today. I want to talk through this slide. This is the second in the category of, I don't know if you're going to believe me, but I want to tell you one more thing about the Mahzor. Okay? And this is true about the Mahzor, and it's true about the Siddur. And I challenge you to prove me wrong. Every single piece of this Mahzor is made up of one of three elements: a blessing, a quote from biblical or rabbinic text, or a poem of some kind. Some sort of poetry that was written by a human. Those are the three elements, and I want you to be attuned. Again, this is the idea of navigating and awareness. I want you to be aware of when you're encountering each of these elements and how they make up the different parts of the service. A blessing, you're going to acknowledge because it says Baruch Atah Hashem, or Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam. It's in a formula. It has halacha that applies to it and a time and a place, right? It's associated with an action or a time and a place in the service. A quote is going to be quoted exactly from the source that it came from, and often there'll be a marginal note to tell you it. And a poem, we're going to have so much fun with poetry. You're going to hear me go through it and say, these are the things we can skip this year. And also you're going to tell me, we can't skip that because those are the parts we love. And that is what makes the Mahzor particularly challenging to cut this year for services, because all the cool stuff is the stuff that we're least obligated to say. What the heck do we do with that? That is going to be one of the cool things we talk about in this class, because if you're coming to this course already great at navigating Siddur and Mahzor, then the awesome thing that you can challenge yourself to do this year is to be that person who can listen or look during the service and say, oh, I see what she did there. I see what he did there in skipping that, right? You can start to become an expert at what was and wasn't skipped in the Mahzor as you understand how it was built. Okay? Great. Almost done. And I want you to be aware that a blessing is always a prayer, but a prayer is not always a blessing. Right? A blessing comes in that formula, but a prayer might not. And we're going to look for these three categories of blessings as we go along. We're going to look for the short ones, the ones that are just Baruch Atah Hashem's, the long ones that are nice long paragraphs, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, and an essay. And then we're going to look for this funny intermediate category that's harder to spot, but once you start looking for them, they're all over the place. Okay? You know the short ones. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Short. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kinshanu mitzvotav v'ratzavanu. And then it comes back at the end to Baruch Atah Hashem. That's a long one. Ta-da! The connected to a friend ones are kind of in between. They begin with something that isn't a blessing, but they end with a blessing, like Elokeinu Ritzeh, which we'll look for in today, like any Kedushat Hayom paragraph in the middle of the Amidah. That is my only hint to you, and I'll point it out to you before the class ends today. So I'm going to stop with the slides. Now we've welcomed a bunch more people to the class as well. Oh, hi to Sharon too. That's great. It's so nice to see all these people have joined us. Before we go to explore the actual outline of the prayer service and then look at the Mahzor together, does anybody have any questions or big comments? But I'm mostly looking for questions here on the slides that we just went through. All right, I'm going to go Judy and then Lori. Jump on in.
My question is, Reshit 24:26. Is that the place of the only instance where there's a bracha in the Chumash?
In the Chumash, I think that that's the case. That's a great question. You want to come back and tell me next week? I don't remember, but I think that that's the case, that that's the only location of a bracha in that formulation in the Chumash. I think later in the Tanakh, yes, there are more. Vered is nodding in a way that makes me think that she also thinks that's the case. I think that's the case in Chumash. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Vered. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Lori.
I just wanted to know if the Pasuk to Simra, is it always the same?
I'm so glad you asked. That's the perfect transition to the Playbill, to the outline of the service. Could we go? That's going to be right at the beginning. Is that amazing? Okay. So, any other questions on that before we go to the Playbill? Okay, great. I'm going to tell you why I call it a Playbill, though. Right? So here's why I call it a Playbill. Because when I go into a show, like a Broadway show, I open up a Playbill and I rush before the lights go down to see what all the numbers are going to be. And I look at which characters are in each number. And if I don't know the play, I try to see if there are any hints in the Playbill as to what's going to happen in this act, right? Who's going to be in which scene. The Playbill gives me all sorts of hints at what's coming next. And then, the lights are going down and we're in it. And we're just sort of in the text. So I want us to think of this outline as something that we can kind of play with in that way. We're going to take a look beginning from the beginning of Birkot HaShachar, going to Pesukei de Zimra, and today my plan is to let us go as far as the Shema. That's as far as I want us to go actually in the Mahzor. There are a few things to know about the key to this playbill. The first is that there are things that are deliberately grafted. This is the first answer to Lori's question. I'm going to look for her face in here. So Lori, to answer your question, you're going to get the first answer to the question. Actually, I think she might have, there she is. So there are things that are almost whole cloth grafted from the Shabbat and weekday morning services. Pesukei de Zimra is one of them. The only thing that's different, and we'll see it tonight, hear it tonight, is the nusach, is the music, the mode and motif for it. But it is almost completely the same. Okay, we'll get there in a minute. Then there are some highlighted in green parts that depart almost completely from Shabbat and weekday and the rest of the year. There are some, remember the poems, very fun things, insertions in the service, and it's important to note that we do not technically need them in order to be complete in our prayers, right? That chiyuv, that obligation, we don't need to get through them. We're going to get to some where you're going to go, oh, really? We wouldn't need to do that? But you'll see. And then I want to note that some things require a minyan, okay? Some of them are overlapping categories, but I did my best to make sure that I could note both where both are necessary. So we're going to start with Birkot HaShachar in a little bit. I want us to take a look through this playbill for just a couple minutes, and then we're actually going to go to the Mahzor. But I want us to peek ahead, okay? So we're going to peek ahead for a few minutes. So first, Birkot HaShachar, all right? So Birkot HaShachar begins with the Torah study. Birkot HaShachar begins with Blessings of the Dawn. Blessings of the Dawn are the Nisim Shebachol Yom, the everyday miracle ideas of just Asher Natan L'Sechvi Vina Le'Avchin Ben Yom Vein Laila, the one who gives the Sechvi the ability to discern between day and nighttime, right? Again, the only difference between that on a weekday and the high holy days is the nusach, is the music and the motif. Okay? And then a little Torah study, a little bit of principles of Rabbi Yishmael, and then we get Kaddish D'Rabbanan, which requires a minyan, and then there are some psalms stuck in there we're going to take a look at, and then we get to Mourner's Kaddish, which I highlighted in a random color, because even though it requires a minyan, we are doing it when we have a minyan constituted and anchored on Zoom these days, so I wanted to note it in a different color. And then we get to Pesukei de Zimra. This is the same order, by the way, that we go through every morning, whether it's Sunday, Saturday, or any day at all, okay? Any holiday of the year. Pesukei de Zimra, it begins by us being invited to rise and saying Baruch She'amar, which is kind of a poem. Okay, it's a little bit of a poem, but I let it slide because it ends with a blessing. Baruch atah Hashem melech mehulal batishbachot. And then we get to sit down and we do so many psalms. And we go through the collections of psalms that are read every day. And there's a sandwich there. So you should be aware every Shabbat and every holiday, there's a sandwich of psalms being done. You can actually experience this in the thicker volume of Sim Shalom, where you have to do some skipping if you're on a weekday. Stuck in between the psalms for every single morning is a chunk, like the cream in the middle of an Oreo, that's like, hey, it's a holiday or Shabbat, we do these. Those are there too, because it's Rosh Hashanah. It's a Yom Tov, okay, or it's Yom Kippur. So we stick those in there. Then we get to Ashrei. Then we're going to get to Psalm 150, Shirat Hayam, and all of a sudden we're in Nishma Kol Chai. When we get here, we're going to talk about how we're in fuzzy territory, about whether or not it's the end of Pesukei de Zimra or the beginning of Shachrit. I swear to you, in our Siddur class, we spent like 4 classes on where is the end of Pesukei de Zimra, where is the beginning of Shachrit. We won't spend that much time here on it, but a little time today on where exactly is the switch from Pesukei de Zimra to Shachrit. I've put the switch here because this is where a new service leader takes over, a new Shatz or Shliach Tzibor or Shlichat Tzibor. Right? At this page 145, they begin at Hamelech. We'll go over why they begin there and how they begin there. You rise, you do Yishabach. There's a special psalm. We'll look at that. We'll look at Chatzi Kaddish. And we'll see that Baruch Hu is there, and both those things require a minyan. And today, we're only going to go as far as looking at Yotzer Or, the insertions that happen between Yotzer or and the first blessing that comes before the Shema, all the way up until the Shema. I want you to note that every single Shacharit morning has the same structure. Baruch Hu, 2 blessings, Shema, a 3rd blessing, Amidah. That is always the structure. By the way, Mariv, the evening service, is Baruch Hu, 2 blessings, the Shema, another blessing, an extra blessing because nighttime's scary, and the Amidah. So it's the same structure. It is structurally rhythmic. Okay? I wanted us to see that 30,000 foot view and for you to have access to that as we go along. Before we actually look into the text together, beginning with Birkot HaShachar, I want to know if anybody has any questions about that structure, about the key or the differentiation between the different parts of the service and the Mahzor. Any questions arising for anybody about this? Feel free to just unmute yourselves and ask if you have any.
Would you just real quick go through those 3 structures that are always the same? I can check them off there. By the way, I printed it out.
It's very colorful printed out. The structure that is always the same is that we begin with Baruch Hu, and then we have 2 blessings, blessing number 1, blessing number 2, the Shema, blessing number 3, and then we go to the Amidah. That is always the blessing. And you're going to begin, as we dig deeper, to start to recognize the components of each of those. That's my goal. I want you to start to know, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, blessing 1. Ohev Amo Yisrael, blessing 2. Right? Micha Mocha, we're almost to blessing 3. Ga'al Yisrael, done. Now we're at Amidah. That is always the structure, whether it's evening or morning. Okay? There's something about knowing that that I'm hoping starts to feel more at home for you. Yeah, Jeff.
Just because I missed the beginning, I've got probably 4 or 5 Mahzors. Which one do these pages refer to?
To the Lev Shalem.
Lev Shalem, okay.
Yes. To the one that has the kind of golden brown toasty cover. And I'm going to put the Lev Shalem up on the screen very shortly.
Okay.
Okay? So we'll look at it together. So I'm going to stop the screen share. Let me just give one more moment just in case anybody has any questions. Feel free to unmute yourselves as I'm just pulling up the Mahzor Lev Shalem anyway.
Rabbi, you are doing such a service. You are demystifying the Mahzor.
Great. I'm glad you feel that way.
Yeah. Even those of us who have gone to services, you are presenting. I love what you said, from 30,000 feet. You're really zooming out and then zooming in. I love it.
Great. I am glad that it feels that way to you. And I know that this may just feel like the beginning to other folks, because that is, it's a lot of material. So if this isn't quite familiar to you yet, then great. But if it's beginning to demystify, that is all I ask for. So let's begin to begin. Whatever Mahzor you have in front of you. I kind of hope it's the Lev Shalem just because it'll make sense to you, I think. But it'll be interesting if you don't have it. If you want to let us know where there are differences or where questions might arise for you. Okay? So I'm going to... Yeah, go ahead.
Say you were going to put the Mahzor up so I don't have to go get mine.
Yep, I'm about to share my screen. I was about to say I'm going to make it really big on the screen, but as I said to the folks who were here last week, there's this kind of funny thing that because the Lev Shalem is licensed, and so it's not, and it is quite the tome. They put it out on a reader called Issue, so it's not quite as navigable, ironic for the class, as if I just had a PDF. So please be patient with me and with it as a reader. So I'm going to I'm going to do my best with it. It was pretty responsive last time, but it's not as good as if I just had a PDF on screen. So we're going to start. I'm sharing my screen in just now. Here we go. So page 37, we begin with Birkot Shachar, and it begins standing. And like I said, it is identical to the pages. It's exactly what we use in our everyday and in our Shabbat davening. It's just the nusach that's different. So if you were to walk in at the very beginning of full liturgy services, you get Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan nesach v'bina ve'avchin bein yom uvein laila. It's not my favorite nusach in the world, but it's something. I've taught it to enough people, now they do it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asari b'tzalmo. Okay, so we go through this page, and the way that this works is the same way that it works on Shabbat, but I'm going to go over that anyway, because maybe this is interesting and informative to you if you're also a Shabbat davener. So we usually sit down either at the end of this page, Hanoten la ya'ef koach, or as we get to the next page at the top of the page here, Hama'avir sheina me'enai utnuma ve'afa pai. And we daven through this page quietly, right? Allah, that we go whisper and then we go out loud, whisper out loud, and usually come back together at the top of page 39 or so at Ashreinu Matov Chelkenu, how happy we are, how good our portion, Umana'im Goralenu, and how great is our lot. Poetry. Remember all the categories? It's just poetry. And then a biblical quote, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed, which we actually do out loud on Yom Kippur even here. If you're there early enough in the morning, you get to see that cool moment. Now that's a deep cut, okay? If you're there in services early enough in the morning, on Yom Kippur, you get to hear how this one line that's whispered in the morning time too, right? You knew that, right? You probably knew that we said Baruch Shem Kavod out loud on Yom Kippur. But what you probably didn't know, if you don't show up at services in the first 2.5 minutes, if not sooner, is that we also do it out loud here, which is really cool. Then at the end of this part of this page, we go a little bit quiet as we do some private Torah study. As I go... Yeah.
For that Shema, you don't cover your eyes or anything, right?
Correct, because the reason that we cover our eyes at Shema, I'm glad you asked, is that we cover our eyes at Shema in order to make certain that we are concentrating closely enough to say every word accurately, because the weight of saying every word perfectly is so heavy on that paragraph. Not at this Shema. That weight is not the same, so we don't worry about that. Okay? But good question. We don't cover our eyes at that one. And then we go quiet to these devotional rabbinic texts, so to speak. They're just suggestions, just so you know. They're just suggestions. You can kind of read it in whatever language you want in one of these sections so that you can you're unlocking the level of Kaddish that allows you to read Kaddish D'Rabbanan by studying a rabbinic text. That's all it's doing. We study a rabbinic text, say Kaddish D'Rabbanan. This is the first point of many in this course when I'm going to say, here's a difference between this year and other years. If you're in a place where there's a minyan constituted in person, Kaddish D'Rabbanan will be said. At Temple Beth Am, if you're not in a place where a minyan is constituted in person, we're going to be skipping Kaddish D'Rabbanan, which is the studying Kaddish that's done in response to having studied those devotional texts. Does that make sense? Because it requires a minyan. It's in a category called Devar Shabikdusha. Right? And then we go to the next page, and this is really interesting. The editors of this Mahzor, I don't know which one Jeff wound up looking at, but the editors of this Mahzor decided to give us Psalm 8. Sure. It has some history behind it, but it's just kind of an interesting and informed poetic choice to give us this psalm to say. They're just giving us some psalms to add in here and you'll see one for Yom Kippur. You'll see one now that we do often say at the beginning of services, which is one we say all beginning next Friday when, no spoilers, the new month begins. And then we begin saying this all the way through Hoshana Rabbah in our congregation, the Psalm for Elul. We say that here. And then we say the Psalm that we say every morning as the last Psalm before Mourner's Kaddish and before we begin Pesukei de Zimra properly, which is Psalm 30. And that's the one that you might recognize because it begins Mizmor Shir Chan. This is so tiny. Mizmor Shir Chanukat. Let me see if I can. Nope, now it's too big. See, I don't like this reader thing. Okay. But I apologize. I can't make. Oh, wait. Maybe I can make that happen. There we go. Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid. You might recognize that part. You might recognize the Elecha. Right? I believe Carla Bach made that rather famous. Elecha Hadoshem Hekra. Some people know the melody. You might also recognize it because it's the first place on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur where the Pesukei de Zimra Nusach sneaks in. It's not Pesukei de Zimra yet, but Nusach creep is real. So people love to start doing the Nusach there because they're like, it's coming, right? And so they do Hafata misfedi lemacholi pitata saki vatazreini simcha lima'an yizamercha chavod velo yidom. And then they always do this. Adonai Elohai leolam modeka. All right. Listen. Try saving that for your cantor at Musaf, but if you really need to do that motif there, which belongs at Musaf, but everyone's been like waiting for it. We've all been sitting on it. So people like to do that right there. And that's kind of your first, I think it's usually the first musical moment in services if you're there early enough where you go, oh, it's the High Holy Days, right? It really feels it right there. It looks like maybe Jeff has something to add or say. Yeah, go for it.
Yes, I'm just curious. We've been using Lev Shalem for, 2 years now? Something like that?
The Mahzor, I think, has been used for about maybe 10 years in this community. Really? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just curious as to how much had changed from the previous version, but do you have any idea? I mean, I'm looking at Mahzor's having a little trouble. It looks quite a bit different, but did it change a lot with Lev Shalem?
Yes, and not that much in this section.
All right.
It changed dramatically in the sections that involve piyutim, in the poetry sections, but not very much when it comes to this section. So you and I could have a little back and forth on what actually changed in this area, because that will be interesting to see what looks different to you. So you should be able to eventually find right before Mourner's Kaddish, somewhere stuck in there should be this page. Okay. Should be the page before Mourner's Kaddish.
Actually, to me, the biggest changes as far as what these areas and stuff is the stuff on the sides. The explanations were the huge change from the old Mahzor, the Silverman Mahzor, which is what we used before.
Right. It is substantial. There's a lot of marginal comments. Great. Okay. So then we get to Mourner's Kaddish. That's it. And we do say it, whether there's a minyan in person or whether we're constituting a minyan digitally, we do it. And then we get to Baruch She'amar. And now we really are in Pesukei de Zimra. And Baruch She'amar is how I teach people to lead Pesukei de Zimra because it contains the full musical pattern of Pesukei de Zimra. Baruch She'amar v'haya olam Baruch hu Hosei v'reshit Baruch Omer v'Hosei Baruch Gozer Hunkayim Baruch Merechem haaretz Baruch Merechem al haberiyot Baruch Meshalem Sachar Tov l'Rehav Baruch Chailad v'Kayam lanetzach Baruch Podei u'Matzil Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. Now that's the way to end. Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo is the non-D ending, right? So if you want to be a little less dramatic, that's what you'll hear. A little haunting. And that's our first, that's the beginning of Pesukei de Zimra. Stepping back from High Holy Days for a second, any morning when we are davening, whether it is Tuesday, Shabbos, or Yom Tov, it's Rosh Hashanah. The basics of Pesukei de Zimra, if you come late or you're like, I like to take my time, give me the best outline, Cantor Chorny. How do I do just, the basics of Pesukei de Zimra? Well, our rabbinic texts tell us that the best shorthand to catch up if you're running late to Pesukei de Zimra, the preferable shortcut version is the following. You do Baruch She'amar, and then you hop, skip, and jump straight to Ashrei. Because we really need to say Ashrei a few times a day, according to some guy who said you should probably say Ashrei a few times a day. It's just very deep in our rabbinic text is this idea of saying Ashrei multiple times a day, some sort of like a luck to it, so we say it a lot. And then, if you don't have time for any more than this, straight to Psalm 150. Hallelujah, hallelujah, el bekodsho, etc., because then you're symbolically finishing the book of Psalms. If you have a little extra time, you can back up and you can do Psalm 148 before you do Psalm 150. Normally, on a totally normal year of High Holy Days, we would go page by page, just like on a normal Shabbat morning in the sanctuary or in the library minyan, we would go page by page by page through Pesukei de Zimra. We would just do it page by page. We'd start on the next page. We'd begin with the Peticha, the opening, Hodu l'Adonai kiruhu vishmo, and then we'd end right here at the Chatima, where the little triangle thingy is. Ki gadol Adonai umhulah mehod, etc. But because we're short on time this year for all the reasons in all the services, whether it's because you're in person and we need to, for safety and legal and time limited purposes, need to keep services shorter, or whether it's Zoom and we're just aware of people's attention spans and the need to provide options, we're not going to be doing the full Pesukei de Zimra in almost any space. So we're almost certainly going to be skipping through. So there are some highlights by either here or in other places. And if you're a regular in the Beitenu space, you're probably much more used to the idea of having like hop, skips, and jumps through Pesukei de Zimra through its highlights. So places like Romemu Adonai Eloheinu and singing Craig Taubman's Romemu, Romemu Adonai Eloheinu. Sure. And then Hoshia et Amecha. Sure. Right? Lots of great highlights you could get through. Mihaish on this acrostic one's a great one. Right? And then often, if we're not going to just hop over to Ashrei, we will typically hop over to Hallel Hagadol, which also involves an invitation to rise. This is one we do also on Pesach. You might recognize it from Seder night if you guys make it to Hallel. Hodu l'Adoshem ki tov, ki l'olam chasdo. People love responsive poetry. Yay. So, this isn't just, don't get me wrong, this isn't just a poem. This is a psalm. It's a biblical quote, okay? So, people like doing this. We rise for this because there's a lot of God names in it, right? Every time you get to, yeah. Anyway, and then after that, we get to, it's sort of weird. We just keep sticking the psalm for Shabbat in often. It's there even on just Rosh Hashanah. So, that's on page 58. And then we get Psalm 93, just because that's the next psalm. Right? So 92 is a psalm for Shabbat. Then we go to 93. It's not very creative, but we do that. And then we go to another biblical quote, and then Ashrei. Okay? And that's when we get to, and often you'll just get a skip from Hallel Hagadol to Ashrei if you're in a skippy kind of service. And then often we're going to get to, remember I said 148 is like the next skip? So usually you'll skip a few psalms here, and you'll wind up at page 62 at the bottom. But thank you, Nava Tehillah. They wrote a great tune for it. So that's great, right? Hallelujah, Tzadoshem min hashamayim. Hallelujah, b'meromim. Hallelujah. Great. Good thing they wrote it for that, because our sages really liked us doing that psalm. So, and then we'll skip over 149 and go straight to this bolded Psalm 150, which I assume is bolded either because a lot of people sing it or because they really wanted us to know. We should probably say it before we finish. A lot of places this year might skip Shirat Hayam. You don't have to say the Song of the Sea. You don't have to recite through it. But we do recite through it every morning normally in services. We do some verses in anticipation of it. We kind of tell the story, how we get there, right? And then we get to Oz Yashir right here, right? And we sell the poem. Yeah.
Who determines what psalms get read?
You mean like on Rosh Hashanah day 1 in some whatever service?
Yeah.
Who's like? You mean? Let me back up a second. Like last Shabbat morning on Zoom, who decided like which psalms and Pesukei de Zimra we were doing?
Because we skip over, like you said, oh, here we are at one, whatever, and now we're on 94.
Whoever is leading, it's at their discretion.
Say again.
It's at the discretion of whoever is leading.
Okay.
And that means being really attuned to your community, to know what they want and don't want, which means that, listen, you too can be like the congregants who email me and say, it's been a few weeks since you sang this, would you mind? So I do get those emails. If you'd like to be that person too, I invite you to be that person. Just be kind. I really mean it, Karen, if you've got a favorite, just let me know. I can't promise anything, but the next time I'm on for Shachrit, maybe.
Okay.
So that's how it gets determined, whoever's on. And then Oz Yashir could get skipped because we don't have to do it. And it is a time suck. So that finishes up with Kilad Oshem HaMelucha U'Moshel Bagoyim. Then there's this beautiful little poem which we don't sing in our community because who has time for extra poetry in the morning? But some people like to read it. It's beautiful. Shachar Avakesh Katsuri Miskabi. I love that. It's so beautiful. There's no time for it. But whoever is leading Pesukei is usually realizing that they're running out of time at this point, right? This is usually about the point where they go, oh my gosh, we're running late on Pesukei. So they usually skip over straight to...
1 second, please.
Yes.
For Az Yashir Moshe.
Yes.
Is the tune a special Rosh Hashanah tune, or is it the traditional?
So, I would guess that people would not do it at all out loud, meaning I wouldn't apply Rosh Hashanah Nusach to Az Yashir. So once I get there, I would just stop, and if I were going to sing it, I would sing it to one of the prescribed melodies that people often sing Az Yashir to.
Well, if it was regular, it would be sung in the library minion. Like, I can't remember how it gets done. That's why I'm asking.
Right. I can't imagine that it would be done ever to like a High Holy Day Nusach applied to it. It would either be done in trope or Az Yashir Moshe.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think just kind of normal. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. And then...
Sorry, Rabbi, if you don't mind repeating.
Sure.
What is the beautiful little piyut that typically there's no time for? It's before Az Yashir. I caught that.
Yeah. It's a Shachar Avakeshka. It's an Ibn Gabral special. So Ibn Gabral, I'm sure I'm butchering his name, but he was the man when it came to medieval poetry. People teach amazing courses on him. You can look, actually, I'm sure JTS has some recorded, archived courses on him. This is one of his many beautiful poems that made it to the Sidor and Mahzor. And this is a poem about dawn. Okay.
Is it page
66?
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You got it. And it's in the Sidor, too. Actually used to have a prominent place in the Sidor Slim Shalom, but I think it kind of lost its place in the new one. But it is an Ibn Gabral special. That guy knew how to write a poem. You can learn from. He wrote beautiful poetry. And then Nishmat, also just a poem, but a beautiful poem, so people like it, right? So if you're gonna need to cut poetry this year because it's like not required liturgy, it's gonna be a hard year. But people love to sing Nishmat ever since Joey Weisenberg wrote that great tune. And then it's a pretty lengthy poem at that, a beautiful one. It's 2 pages long, and this is definite gray zone territory. Are we in Pesukei de Zimra? Are we in Shachrit? I don't know. I would say Pesukei de Zimra. That's my camp. I say Shachrit starts like right before Baruch Hu. But some people say this is still, like this is already Shachrit-ish territory. because Pesukei de Zimra really finishes with Psalm 150 when we finished it formally. So we're in the no person's land territory. We finish up at the top of page 69, and I would like to point out to you my least favorite thing so far that we've come across in the class, meaning the thing we've come across so far that is my least favorite editorial choice in the book, which is that they've marked this place, which is not where the new Chazanit Shatz person starts leading from. This is not right. Like, this is not a helpful marking. This is where the next person starts. I think this is misleading a little bit. I don't know. They seem to have tried very hard, but like, good try. But this is very confusing. This is not where we start. This is where we start. We start at HaMelech for either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, but it's based on the idea that Malchut is at the center of the whole season, especially Rosh Hashanah, but at the whole season, Malchut being sovereignty, kingship, right? The whole idea of the crown of glory.
So if I could just throw in a thought. I think the reason that they did the Ha'el thing is because the person who's been leading up until now comes in at that point to conclude what they're doing. And then Hamelech, starting right totally as a totally new paragraph, centered, makes a big point of that really being the break. I think that was their thinking.
I agree. I totally think that was their thinking too. And if you know that Hamelech is where you start, I think that makes perfect sense. I just sort of wonder. I totally agree, Henry. And I think it was like a really good try on their part. And also, I think it just sort of takes a slight disclaimer, maybe, that this is a little slightly misleading. Only in that, Ha'el b'tatzu maruzecha. Well, let's let somebody who we haven't heard from so much answer this question. On what days would we start at Ha'el? Where it indicates here, would the new Shliach Tzibor, Shlichat Tzibor start there? Because that is a starting point, just not on Rosh Hashanah. Does anyone know? Even if you have chimed in before.
Shabbat, every Shabbat.
Not on Shabbat.
Ha'el?
Ha'el is for Yom Tov. Right? Because Shochenad is for Shabbat.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Right? And Ha'el is Yom Tov. So Ha'el is the other Yom Tov, right? So Ha'el is Pesach and Sukkot and Shavuot. Ha'el b'tatzu maruzecha, right? That's the only reason why I sort of go, that's a little confusing, because it is a Yom Tov beginning. It's just not this Yom Tov. But it is a really good try, because it is the end of where the last person needs to come in still. That's true. All right, let's see if we can get as far as the Shema. I think we can get a little bit further, and then my goal is that in about 6 minutes, I will stop talking, and I'll stick around to answer questions when we get there. So this is, again, let me just take a look at who's still hanging with us. Lori, to go back to your question before about Pesukei de Zimra, and to go back to the framing of where things are kind of the same as Shabbat and not the same as Shabbat, this is identical text still to Shabbat. It's just kind of edited and musically justified differently, right? It sort of makes the music super important because it changes the whole tenor and atmosphere of the situation, because this is identical. If you were to open Sidor Lev Shalem next to it, it would be identical to this. But we're not singing that here, right? We're singing Shochenad marom v'kadosh shemo v'chatuv ranenu tzadikim b'Adonai l'shanim nava tehila. I don't know. I'm not usually on for Shachrit. It's usually somebody else fun in the sanctuary. It's been a long time since I've been asked to be on for this part. But
where was that you just sang?
That was the Shochenad marom v'kadosh shemo. Right? That's the Shochenad here. HaMelech Yoshev al Kisei Ram Benisa Shochenad marom v'kadosh shemo.
Okay, now who is there?
Yeah, it's just fancy, fancy High Holy Day nusach. And then, uvmakalot, yishtabach, all of it identical to Shabbat davening, right? And no indication here, but this is also where you're asked to rise, right? So just give, if in case you're making notes in your siddur, you might make a note that you're invited to rise at yishtabach, right here at the bottom of the page. Baruch atah Hashem el melech gadol batishbachot, right? As opposed to El melech gadol batishbachot. See how the music totally changed? It's the same words, but the music totally Melech el chei holamim or Melech el chei holamim. That's very High Holy Days. Or Melech el chei holamim. Shas. The music is the only difference. It's exactly the same words. Then we have a little exception. Oops. We have a little exception in that we pause to insert this psalm, which, by the way, little asterisk, in this era of COVID, we have been actually inserting the psalm in daily davening. Pretty cool. There's often an ark opening. I don't know why. I guess it's a good excuse for an ark opening. So there's an ark opening. We do that. And then if you're in a place where there's a minyan, this is where I marked on the outline, you would do Chatzi Kaddish. This is not the Yit Gadol. This is not that one. Okay? This is not the famous Yit Gadol v'Yit Kadash. Not that one. This is just Yit Gadol v'Yit Kadash. Just the morning plain one. And then, again, if you have a minyan, Baruchu. Baruchu. Beit Adoshem HaMevorach. It's fun nusach. I hope we get to do it this year somewhere. Rosh Hashanah has its own paragraph. Yom Kippur gets an extra paragraph. Both days we have this really cool Or Olam Be'otzar Chaim. It's a very cool line, both because of its music and also because of what it means. Or Olam Be'otzar Chaim. The eternal light is found in the Otzar Chaim, in the treasure of life. Orot Me'ofel Amar Vayehi. God said, let there be light from darkness. So it is an extra declaration of God's creation-y prowess and powers on the High Holy Days. And then we have two different things that happen. If you've been paying attention to the calendar, we have Shabbat as the first day of Rosh Hashanah this year. We have a weekday, Sunday, right? Sunday's a weekday in davening. Sunday's a week. So that's what I mean. So it says on weekdays we recite. Don't forget, Sunday's a weekday to Jews. So very confusing. That's what we would do. We go right to the next page, Hameir La'aretz, identical to normal weekday davening, except the music. Hameir La'aretz Valadarim Aleha. Identical. We go through that on Sunday. If it's the Saturday, though, we go to Shabbat. Right? Hakol yoducha ve'kol yishabechucha. But you have to switch the music. Hakol yoducha ve'kol yishabechucha. So, it's just a matter of the music switching over. And, oh, look at the bottom of the page, a poem. Yay, poems. So, Eladon is a poem, but if you skip Eladon this year, do not tell them I was the one to tell you to skip Eladon in your service this year if you're in charge of some service outline. But, it's a time, it does take a long time to sing through it. And then services continue here on Shabbat, La'ela Sher Shabbat Mikol Ma'asim. Mikol Ma'asim Tiparach Moshienu Al Shevach Ma'aseh Yadecha. Again, it's the same exact nusach as we do on Shabbat. Same exact words, just different nusach. Okay? And then we have a page where you join up together, and it's identical to any Shabbat and to any weekday. Okay? We are in totally shared territory. It's just the music that changes. If you're following along here, we are almost to blessing number 1. We are almost the official blessing number 1, the blessing over light, right? We're almost to blessing number 1 of blessing 1, 2, and 3 that sandwich around Shema. So this is blessing number 1 right here. Or chadash al Zion tahir. Right here. But in order to get to it, we get this miniature little Kedusha situation, which next time we will get into, and we'll get into the poetry of this moment. Kulam ahuvim, kulam bevrurim, kulam giborim. Look at the poet who wrote that. It's like a Mother's Day acrostic. It's great. And then you have some hearts on this page.
Bracha number 1, I'm not seeing that.
What's that?
Bracha number 1.
So blessing number 1 is all the way down. It's the very last line on your page is blessing number 1.
Okay.
We're almost there. Baruch atah Hashem yotzer meorot. Or if your person leading you can't help themselves, yotzer meorot. I'm just saying, there's some leaders, every single blessing. And then the next page, this should look familiar to you too. Now you're deep in familiar territory, right? Both these pages should be, but this is the page, let's be honest, where you glaze over a little. You're like, what is even happening here between the Baruch Hu and this first one? Here's what's happening here. Kedusha de Yotzer, okay? You're doing this little mini Kedusha, a little angelic praise of God. It's just a giant paragraph of poetry. You participate in 2 little spaces, just like on the Kedusha, in the Amidah, Kadosh, 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 Adoshem, Sevaot, Maloch, Haaretz, Kavodo, right? And Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo, same thing, okay? And then you finish with that blessing number 1, and we get to the second blessing page, which you know, which, let's be honest, some people, even on Rosh Hashanah, Ahava Rabbav Tanu, I mean, some people are just going to do it. Maybe. And they're going to get you all the way through this page with great, abundant love. You have loved us, God. Adonai Eloheinu. And we get to the bottom of the page, and we get to the second blessing, love, which gets us up to the Shema. Okay? Baruch atah Hashem, habocher b'mo Yisrael. I wouldn't blame you if you did be'ahava. Because you're preparing for Shema Yisrael Adoshem Elokeinu Adoshem Echad. And if it's not Yom Kippur, whispering the next line. Okay? I am going to unshare my screen because it's 8:48, so it's pretty close. I'm going to stick around here because I try to honor that I said that this class is going to be an hour and 15 minutes each time. Next time, we're going to move from this Shema space into Amidah for Shachrit and all the way, hopefully, through the Torah service. That is my hope. Okay, we might even get further than that, too. Might even get into the first parts of Musaf, which would be wonderful. I really hope you stick with this and stick with this group. I'm not going anywhere. I'll answer questions for the next few minutes, but I just honor the fact that some people don't have more than 75 minutes to give, so I want to let you know what's coming next time and encourage you to come next time as well. I hope that's exciting to you. And now, anybody who has questions or...
Rabbi, now in Shema on page 77?
Yeah.
Covering of the eyes?
Covering of the eyes.
Thank
Good night, Lori. It's good to see you. Yes, that one we cover our eyes for because the whole, like, wanting to say every single word of that just right. Yeah.
What's the schedule as far as has it been finalized a little bit about what's going to happen in the synagogue?
Yeah, we're very close. Tomorrow we have a meeting with the clergy, so we'll finish our schedule for both days of Rosh Hashanah, and then we'll publish that to the community. So there are going to be at least 3 digital service offerings each day of the High Holy Days, including each day of Rosh Hashanah specifically, with a full liturgy service each of those days. And there are also going to be 3 slots the first day and either 2 or 3 slots the second day that are out on Ziering Field with a certain number of people hovering between, the highest number would be 150, but it's much more likely to be lower than that number. That will be open to reservation very soon. So we'll open up slots for reservation for people to sign up for those. And then the Yom Kippur schedule will come out after that.
Now, you people will be doing on the Ziering Field, but who will be doing the 3 services?
So we have a lot of clergy coverage over the different services, and we're rotating in and out of all those spaces.
Oh, really? Oh,
right?
okay.
So the way that it's going to work is I'm going to be on the field likely for one of the most early services because I'm on for Musaf both of the days in the full liturgy service online, like in the online anchored space. So that means that I'm going to do an in-person something on the field early in order to make sure I can be in the sanctuary later. And then there's a similar rotation happening with Rabbi Kligfeld where he's actually on for the earlier part of those sort of sanctuary anchored services. So he's on the field a little bit later. And Rabbi Schatz and actually Rabbi Josh Roshovsky's on in the rotation. There's some Cantor Michelle Stone somewhere in there mixed too. So we're mixed around.
So, but you say there's going to be a full service, like a 4-hour service?
There's going to be.
They're all going to be 2 hours.
There is going to be a way for you to kind of soup to nuts tune into. I can't remember the timing that we wound up thinking of, but basically like 9:30 to noon, I think is what we imagined it as, where you start at Baruch at Bir Kodesh Achar and go all the way through the end of Musaf. But even that won't be, even when I say full liturgy soup to nuts, because that service doesn't have a minion of human beings in the room at it, there's still so much stuff we have to cut. So it's still shorter than usual, right? So you're right, it won't be as long as usual.
Okay, but there is going to be one that'll keep us. I mean, I'd rather be busy on the holiday than, just sitting only 2 hours with work. Yeah. But I won't go to the synagogue because of my age. I'm too old to be around people.
You know, Barbara, when I'm running this High Holy Day liturgy subcommittee, like to kind of plan, and we've had 2 meetings, we're about to have a third. And since the beginning, the most surprising thing to me, but I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised, is the number of people who have said, we just sort of want there to be a High Holy Day thing running all like through each day, like all the way through, right? I want to just sort of be able to tune in and have it there, right? Because they're long days and people, if you can't be at the shul, you want to be able to kind of, I guess, tune in. But people
are used to going till 1:30 or so.
Yeah.
Minyan. I mean, that's kind of normal.
Yeah. It'll be odd because there are other elements missing, you know, miss our meals with people, miss other things too.
Exactly.
Yeah. I really feel, I feel bereft of that myself. And we're still trying to figure out how to, I mean, I don't know. There's some sort of metaphor in here that will be instructive somewhere, and I'm still waiting for the Torah on it. But basically, like, I don't know how people survive eating like a shake that tastes the same every day, but or something like that, like on Soylent or something. But basically, Zoom is still Zoom, you know, yeah. And I feel that even teaching this class, I feel a little badly. Like it still is just you opening up another screen and, you know, being in another class through a screen. So I feel that, really hard.
I don't think you should feel that way about Zoom. I actually like not having to run to the synagogue.
I'm glad.
I actually like these things. I don't know about others.
Yeah.
It enables me to actually participate because we live so much further away and the traffic. So I've been able to enjoy a lot more.
Yeah. I only feel that I want everything to be differentiated, to have its own flavor. Right. So your eyes don't glaze over, you know, at yet another staring at the screen. But I'm glad that it enables you to participate. I am, for both of you. Yeah. This has been wonderful. Thank you for coming tonight, every one of you. I'm really excited to get past the Shema. Very excited because I've spent 2 weeks on this, so now I'm ready. Let's get through the Amidah. You ready? Next week. I'll see you next week.
I'll put it into my schedule to come back on next week.
Great. I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.